This artwork is based on events in Hong Kong in the autumn of 2014. There are 4 parts to it. One part is faces, another part is called spaces, the third part is called blockades, and the fourth part is called gallery. It started with a sketch I made at the beginning of October, the start of what became known as the Umbrella Movement. It references woodcuts from the Communist Revolutionary period and also the 100 Flowers movement from the 1950s. It also specifically references Joshua Wong, the student leader of the protest movement. And I started by making a pastiche of the revolutionary woodcut. The caption is a translation of the Chinese, "Revolution is no crime." I then redid this as a lino cut and printed it 80 times on red paper as a floor tile measuring 12 by 12 inches. I then laid them out in a checkered tile pattern in order to represent the actual size of a 160 square foot flat, which is the size that is currently being built by developers in Hong Kong. There are 2 items placed on the floor, a chair and a table, both collaged. The 2 pieces are placed opposite one another, like the last 2 pieces in a game of chess, which can bring to mind the end game currently being played out between the government and the protesters. The separation of the chair and the table can suggest tension and lack of dialogue, as well as contested ownership of the space. As a 3D piece that the viewer can walk around, this artwork is meant to both permit and represent different perspectives. On the other hand, the 2 items are easily interpreted as 2 immovable objects, one with its back up and the other clinging in a rather crab-like posture to its position. I'm trying in this artwork to juxtapose elements in an ironic way and to create both literal and symbolic references. I see it as a 3-dimensional history piece, a collage of motifs. The layout here may not be ideal, and there is quite a lot of distracting clutter in the background. I'm not sure where the ideal site would have been for it, not the protest site itself, because the message in it is too ambivalent for that. Personally, I think the strongest part of this whole piece is the floor, as it's quite simple and graphic and makes its point rather clearly. The view through the back of the chair may suggest the bars of a prison, particularly when it brings into focus the images of the police at the other side of the room. The chair is collaged with the more strident images of the revolutionary poster, combined with bright colours, red suggesting revolution, and extracts from a calendar, perhaps making us think of seizing the day. But there's irony in that this is a rather geeky revolutionary hero, and that the chair is a static object representing a movement. The table, on the other hand, is a more complex collage with a lot more layers and images, and could perhaps be seen as an updated version of the traditional history genre in painting. It's a perfect square and sits as a horizontal surface and needs to be read from 4 different angles. Try to arrange the colours and lines so that the eye would be led around it no matter what angle it was approached from. But it's a non-traditional narrative, as it juxtaposes flatness and depth, symbolic images, realistic images, painted surfaces, collage materials, and found objects. The colours are symbolic. Yellow was the colour chosen by the students to represent their hopeful umbrella movement, whereas the rather leaden blue represented the forces of the opposition. Red doesn't quite know what it's doing here. On the one hand, it is a traditional Chinese colour related to lots of customs. On the other hand, it's also related to the Chinese Communist Party. It's a colour that proclaims that revolution is no crime. There are many references, both visual and textual, to the business world, and the photographic images of hands are highly ambiguous in their gestures. The heaviest hand of all, of course, was China's, and while this was going on, this piece of socialist realism was for sale at a local auction room. The title is All Chinese Children Love You, and the price is 4 million Hong Kong dollars. This inspired me to create another piece as a virtual art gallery. This gallery, the mannequin, is both observer and exhibit. She wears the symbols and the badges of various creeds and commitments, while perhaps being more concerned with appearances. Her head is tilted upwards, seeing and being seen, and she wears the umbrella, now turned into a poppy, behind her ear. Upward gaze leads us physically and thematically to the framed picture of the flowers raising their heads towards the sun. The graffitied slogan here references the 100 Flowers movement. Let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 thoughts content. Blue and white vase sitting to the side makes further reference to Chinese tradition and culture. Flowers turning their heads to the sun may be burnt and fall like Icarus, which is a parallel to what happened to the intellectuals during or just after the 100 Flowers movement, which may have just served to flush them out. The broken umbrella references the current movement, while also suggesting a poppy, which of course has its own semiotic weight. The other side of the room to this is another version of a history painting, this time painted on a canvas scroll, not being read left to right or right to left, but perhaps being read both ways and clashing in the middle. It's hung on a road barrier of a type that's typically seen around Hong Kong. The canvas is roughly attached to the barrier in a way that is quite often the case for advertising hoardings, which makes it maybe seem a bit like street art. It starts on the right with a reference to Chinese ink landscape painting, and then moves across quickly to the image of Chairman Mao or somebody who's in that image I mentioned before, the socialist realism poster, which was for sale in Hong Kong for $4 or $5 million, a huge amount of money for such kitsch. The lines then lead you down to an image which is meant to be very, very threatening, and this should reference the fact that throughout this movement, the idea that China would send in the tanks was always at the back of people's mind. Heavy leaden sky is there again, and those neat and tidy circles, perhaps reminiscent of the Olympics. The central part of the image is the umbrella movement itself, which goes back to this sketch that I did before. And this side of the canvas is very, very different to the right-hand side. Here we see much looser movement, suggestion of rain, of tears, of things being washed away, but also the circles now are freer moving and perhaps suggest a more hopeful atmosphere than the ones on the left, which are tightly controlled by China. Seen all together, it represents a clash of ideas. Similarly, the images of the police are meant to represent the different viewpoints, different perspectives, and the different roles that they played throughout the movement. These images would have been done on the wall if I could have done that. They are using graffiti-style techniques with spray paint through a stencil. They also use printmaking techniques when collage and decollage, and they represent the different faces that the police portrayed throughout the movement, from the supportive and positive to the downright sinister. Collage here also suggests covering up and uncovering. So this is my first attempt at doing anything like this, and I hope it works and means something to somebody apart from myself. As I speak now, the whole movement is over and everything is gone.